All right, so one of the things we talked about last time is labeling all these wires, because they are going to have to come off these connectors, and that's so we can take this entire section of this wire here and make it look somewhat presentable. So the first step was we went ahead and we labeled every single one of these wires. So B is going to be for the blue connector, which we have marked, if you remember, blue, B for blue, R for red. And to make it a little bit easier, I actually just got a couple markers, red and blue, and just used red ink on each on red and blue on blue. So what I did was, this is a little more than you guys really need to do. Part of this is for me, is while I'm doing the work, I can actually kind of keep an eye on what I'm doing. So what we got here is, we'll mark each one for the pin location it is and the block. So B43 is gonna go in B block pin 43. So this one is injector, what do we got? Right around the edge of that one, injector 7. So this is actually the control wire that fires injector 7. So as you see, there's like, so you have one wire to control each injector, so you're gonna have 8 of these. Then you have one wire to control each coil pack, so 8 of those, and so on and so forth. So that's where you see we're getting most of these wires from, just those few controllers we have left. So now that we have that done, we can actually go ahead and depin the rest of these. A little hard to see in the last video. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and get these all disconnected. We're gonna trim off all the power wires out of here. And then we're gonna mark the power wires as well for the coils, for the injectors, for the MAF, for the O2 sensors. That way, when we go ahead and put them onto their own fuse panel, because we are gonna do like a little 4 fuse panel with a couple relays, we can actually separate them so that they're not overwhelming the panel. All right, so this actually only took me about 10 minutes, and I got the entire cluster of wires unwound, and everything is running up, plugged into where it's going. The only thing I don't have plugged in is the ejector wires, because these are actually the wrong type. These, I think, from like a O2 Yukon, and I'm not sure which plugs these ones actually fit, but they're not the injectors I'll be running, which are just like stock truck injectors. But I actually do have a whole set of the correct harnesses, and I'm just gonna have to wire those in. That really all I need to know is about how far they need to run. But everything else, coil packs in the correct one, map sensor in the correct one. We got cam position. Looks a little messy back here, but back sensor. And then everything else actually runs under the intake, which is a bundle of wire here that are actually, without the back sensor, are gonna get loomed together and actually run out the front here. And we end up with mass airflow sensor, alternator wire. We have the throttle position sensor, IAC stepper motor, coolant temp sensor here. And then we have bank 1 coils, bank 1 injectors, and crank position sensor down here. Now all these are gonna run back, and this small bundle will actually be our backbone harness. So that'll actually, I don't know if you guys can get a concept of that. This right here is actually gonna be as thick as the wire harness is gonna be at its thickest point. So it's actually gonna be really, really small. And since we have it running back here, then what we can do is actually run this into the firewall of the vehicle. We put it in, and then we'll be able to put the ECU inside the firewall. So not a lot. Well, actually I do have a couple extras over here. Those are the O2 sensors. So those are the bank 1 and 2 upstream O2 sensors. So those ones, so they haven't done it yet because they only actually have to come back here to the back of the motor when the exhaust manifolds come out, and then they're just gonna go inside there. For the burnout motor, we might not even run them. This thing's not long for this world. It's gonna be a one-time use run, and it should run just fine on default settings. I mean, this isn't like we're trying to cruise with this thing. We're wide open throttle until this engine dies. So we'll decide whether or not we need to run them or not. But as you can see, and actually these ones will actually be run under the fuel rail here, and they're gonna come up over to the coil pack, and the injector will just come on the inside there. Once this is all said and done, you actually see nearly no wires except for what's exposed on the front. And this all gets actually pretty good tucked and loomed. We did it on the El Camino motor, and you can't really see anything, especially once it's nice and loose. And anything that runs in a similar direction, we actually loom them together and then split them right before they go to where they're going to be going. Mass airflow sensor is probably the only one that's going to come out the farthest, and it's going to go right to the intake. Pretty smooth setup, and it doesn't take all that much work. So now that we have that done, we're going to go ahead and get these loomed up. We're going to re-terminate the injector wires. We're going to get these loomed all the way up and get this bundled together. So there's a few things we do have to do still. Once we cut all this out of the other wire harness, we actually went through and cut all of our ground wires out of the bundle. Otherwise they'd be bundled together. So we will have to re-terminate all the ground wires for like coil packs and everything back together again. So I would rather have a nice clean ground than the grounds that they have set up in there. They're all kind of piggybacking off each other. And then we also have to terminate our pinks. So all of our pinks are actually going to be the switched ignition wire for whatever source they're running. In this case, it's injectors. We have ones for the coils. So these ones don't run anywhere except for back to a switched ignition source, which is going to be the fuse box that we put in. So we're still going to have to re-terminate all those. And then over here we have the little dangly wires. These are the ones that run from the PCM, but don't run to the motor per se, with the exception of the PCM grounds, which there's like, I believe, 4 grounds. 4 different ground wires there. And they run to 2 pins on each block connector. So you usually have one on each end and then one on each end. And so you have 4 grounds total. Those ones are gonna run to the PCM, and that can get chassis ground or engine ground. It doesn't matter. It just has to have a nice solid ground point. And then everything else in here is gonna be like your orange wires are your positive non-switched, meaning that you're getting positive battery voltage all the time and it keeps the memory. And then all the pinks, which I think you have 2 orange, 2 pink. These are the switched voltage, so meaning that when you turn the key to the on position, this is what powers on the PCM. And then we have others like trigger wires for the fuel pump, trigger wires for, let's see, we can do without that. Check engine light, nope. Let's see, vehicle speed sensor. We're actually not running that one on here because we don't have an electric transmission. TAC output. So these are just the wires that are coming off the PCM and going to be actually going to the chassis. So they don't actually have to go into the main harness. But next step, we'll just go ahead and get this all loomed up ready for you guys, make it look all nice and pretty, and we'll get this engine set up to do a nice engine stand startup. All right, time for a quick little update and try to keep you guys in the loop as much as possible with what's going on here, because a lot of this work is just tedious, slow moving work. So I'll just try to give you guys some quick updates as we're going along. So here's where we're at. I mean, just look at it. So nice, so nice. So much nicer than what it did look like. I'm just so happy with the way it looks. So this is the passenger side bank. We have coil and injectors 2 through 8. And it looks good, it's nice and clean, and it'll actually look even better because this whole thing is actually gonna roll underneath and actually be tucked under the fuel rail. All you're gonna see is the loops up from the harness going to each injector and then the coil. So this one's actually not too bad. We did have to cut and splice these connectors on because it actually came with a different plug for the injectors. And that's gonna be something that'll probably be unique to your build. In my case, I just had this harness laying around, and it was actually for a slightly newer setup, so it came with different injector plugs, and we just went ahead and swapped them out for the ones that work with us. Ignore how ugly this looks. It's gonna get shaved and it's gonna look pretty until, you know, we throw a rod and possibly burn this thing to the ground. So this side is actually pretty straightforward. There's not a lot that has to be changed on it. We went ahead and loomed it up to the back. The split loom is really nice. Putting on the slip loom's a lot harder because you actually have to slip it on over the wire. There is no split on it, and then we go ahead and put a piece of heat shrink on the end of it. Little pro tip, I didn't do it here, but maybe you guys are pros. You can put some adhesive on the end of there and it'll actually keep that to stick on there better so it doesn't ever want to slide off. But I mean, depends on how bougie you want to get with your build. But as you can see, we can now have our new backbone coming to the back here. We have a lot more wires to work on, but these are actually probably the hardest to actually work on because the rest of them, you just slip loom all the way up. And then you only have to put that slip loom on the ends, whereas these ones actually have to all tie into each other, and you're gonna see more of them, and it's gonna look uglier if you let it look uglier. So a lot of this is actually unnecessary for a lot of people's builds. I want it to look nice. Some of you guys might be here just to see the engine stand startup, but we're gonna go through everything, and this is really important to me. So over here we have bank 1, we have the 4 injector plugs, and we have the coil pack. So this is what they're gonna look like prior to actually looming them all together. So these are our individuals, and as you can see, get one of them in frame here better. So we just put our slip loom on. We have to run it from the back up. On these ones, it was a little easier for me because I had to splice it in. I ended up cutting these and then just sliding everything over before I soldered and heat shrink these back together. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're gonna do that then. Otherwise, it's a lot harder, especially since we have all these labeled at the back, to actually slip that stuff over these. And especially, I mean, for the injector wires, you only have 2 wires, but for the coils, you have about 6. So keep that in mind. You're gonna have to slide it over all those tags you had to make. So try not to rip those off, and try not to make them too long if you don't have to. You can make them smaller and make it work, then it's fine. So because of the way we actually did this is something you will have to keep in mind. When this harness was new from the factory, from GM, like I said before, you have the ECU over here on the driver's side fender. The wire harness comes up over the top and it feeds the injectors from front to back. Not the way we're doing it over here, back to front. On this side, it is back to front, so we didn't have to do anything different because the original harness comes up, over, and kicks back around. So the wires are in the correct place. However, when we run the driver's side bank, it originally came this way, and we're gonna be flipping them this way. Now that provides a problem. The length of each wire. So the length of each one of these wires is vastly different because of the way they feed in from. So this is something you have to take into account when you're doing it and running it this way. And I decided to bring this up in this video. That way, if one of you guys follow all my directions and then end up saying, oh, well, my wires aren't long enough now, and I can't get cylinder 1 to get to the ECU, and cylinder 7 has way too much wire. You can't get in the comments and blame me for it, okay? I'm gonna tell you now. It's gonna be absolutely reversed, and you're gonna have to mark that down. So what we do is we take all of these injector harnesses and we flip them. 7 becomes 1, and then all the way back, 5 becomes 3, so on and so forth. And what that does is it gives us the right length of wire per injector. Now, there's a couple ways to do that. And one of them would be, I mean, you wouldn't have to flip it. You could say just lengthen and shorten the wires accordingly. That's definitely one option. Easier option. Instead of cutting these wires, I mean, I already had to cut them, not a big deal. But if you're not cutting them, don't do it. The easiest way is you actually just flip the pins on the harness. Now, if you remember, when we took all these off, we marked that we tagged the bottom of the wire where it goes into the harness. So what this is now, let's go ahead and look at our tag. So when we first pulled this wire off, we marked it B43 for blue pin 43 injector. And this one ended up being right on the edge of this here. It says injector number 7. So it's hard to see, but it says right there, there's a 7 above my thumb. So then what I did, we go back to injector number 7, needs to be flipped with injector number 1. So injector number 1 is pin blue 36 for injector number 1. So now I just flip it over and I write the B36, and then I designate it as 1. I also give it a nice little 1 on the end of this plug here, and that makes it a lot easier to not screw it up. So what that means is when I terminate this into the block connector for the ECU, this one will not be terminated into B43 anymore. Instead, it'll be terminated into B36. And now the exact opposite goes for injectors, for the original injector 1 is now going to get terminated to B43. So that makes all the sense in the world. That's all we're doing. We're switching 1 and 7 and 5 and 3. And that's going to keep our lengths the correct length, and you're not going to run into any issues having to lengthen or shorten these just because they're not going to fit anymore. So keep that in mind. If you want to run this thing front to back like we're doing here, you're going to have to do that. Don't say I didn't tell you, okay? I told you. Remember that. If you come in the comments and start asking me about that, I'm going to tell you to go back and watch the video because we covered it. We did. We absolutely did. So, God, look how gorgeous that looks. I don't know if you really get the depth of detail on this video, but it looks so good. It looks so much better than that crap convolute that they put on there. I mean, it's just the worst stuff ever. I get it. It's cheap, but it looks like crap. And this stuff is not very expensive. I can't remember what I paid for it, but I've now done 2 motors with this and I still get a ton of it left. So when I'm doing these, I'm running about 12 inches of loom on each one. And that's only because they're not gonna show 12 inches of loom. So if we go back here, this one maybe would show 12 inches, barely, but it actually has more than that on it. So it has more than enough that it goes into the slip loom just fine. And you're not gonna see anything. This is actually gonna get slid forward to cover up the tape seam there. We also tape them down at the bottom so the loom doesn't slide forward on it. But then we go over to the slip loom. I can't remember the exact size that this one covers. If I can, I'll try to look up my purchase history on this stuff and put it in links in the description for the slip loom and the split loom that I used. I also have, I think this one's either 3/4 or 1/2 inch loom. I want to say it's probably 3/4. And then I have either inch or 1.5 inches. That's for the backbone once the big block of wires come in there. So I have all the different sizes, and I think every time I bought a bundle of this stuff, it was maybe like 15 bucks. And like I said, 2 motors into this stuff's really paid for itself. So we're gonna go ahead and try to finish up as much work as we can here. We're gonna move along and I'll try to give you guys some updates. I thought about even doing a time lapse on this, but it is so tediously boring that you're not gonna have any takeaway from it. It's really simple. It's just a lot of little work just putting this on the wires. There's nothing to it. All right, so just another quick update. It looks beautiful, don't it? Yes, it does. All right, so even though these are all gonna be running in one loom, we're actually keeping everything separated per injectors, injector power, and coil. So the reason for that is, if you look, there's a lot of pinks in here. These pinks actually run to ignition switch power on. So it's what gives the injectors their power as well as the coils their power. Everything else is signal wires from the ECU. And the reason we're doing this is we want to make sure that the coil bank on the driver's side and the coil bank on the passenger side are actually going to be tied into the same fuse. And then the injectors on bank 1, which is driver's side, and bank 2 will all be tied together using the same fuse. This does 2 things. It's one, gonna make it easier for us to troubleshoot issues if we're having a problem with coils or if we're having a problem with injectors and we need to check a fuse or pull a fuse, or if something's wrong, we know it's not all bundled in the same fuse. Second of all, it's not overloading a single fuse. If we have all the injectors and the coils running off one fuse, you're probably gonna blow that fuse. So food for thought. Try to keep it separated as best as you can, just make it clean. And it also, if you need to do troubleshooting later on and you have to open this loom up, it's gonna be a lot easier than trying to pick out wires throughout there if you bundle them correctly. So we already know that these are for the 4 injectors, and then we know that the one that's gonna be bundled in this one is gonna be power for the coils. So we do the same thing on both sides. It just makes it a lot easier. All right, so look how far we've gotten so far. Map sensors loomed, cam position sensors loomed, crank position sensors loomed, all the way over, plugged in. So looking clean. We got our grounds actually done. So they're tied into the coils, and then they're actually coming back here and gonna be running down the backbone because they do have to run to the ECM as well. And see, we broke it out into 2, so we got one on the head and one on this head. I actually might just put it to the block instead. Should make a difference. We got this whole section here done, and I just need to put the finished piece of loom on it, but left it off so you guys can see. It'll look just like this one. Now, a couple things to note. If we take a look over here at the wire harness, this is actually gonna be the section that's gonna be going into the PCM. So this is an issue you're gonna run into and you're gonna have to account for. Now that we're changing up the way this is done, you're gonna have massively different lengths and cables. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the average length of about the shortest distance here, which will be these. And you see some of them are just a little bit longer. Most of them are about the same there, but then you have some that are just absolutely massively longer. So there's a couple things you're gonna have to do, and I'm gonna actually do both, but you can do one or the other. It'll work either way, but one way is actually say, okay, find our average length of the short ones and say anything longer than that is gonna need to be cut. Now, the problem with that is I just don't like to do any cuts if I don't have to, because you're introducing another possible problematic area into the harness that is gonna cause you more issues down the road if it fails, if that splice fails. I mean, we're gonna make sure that everything's here is soldered and heat shrink, heat shrunk, but still, I don't want to introduce a possible area to have an issue. So one of the things you can do is these ones that maybe it's just a little bit longer is we're going to go ahead and just kind of tuck. So if we just kind of loop back and we end up with the same length. So after we terminate them back into the block connector, we can say, okay, this one here is only a few inches long. Just tuck it in. And it's not going to look bad. I mean, if you do 1,000 of them, it might. But a couple of them here and there. And one of the other things you can do is, like say the next one, you can actually stagger your loops just to keep them that they're not in one big tumor right here. Now, that being said, some of these are just too long to do that. And that is where we will be cutting and splicing them back together. But like I said, we're going to try to limit that as much as possible. On the flip side of that, you are going to run into issues like this. Alternator wires. That's about how long they are. Well, they're both the same length, but yeah, that's all the way from here to here. We're about 24 inches short on these. So that's one we're going to have to address. These are way too short. Everything up top is now loomed and finished except for putting the slip loom on here. Once that's done, then I'm actually done with everything that's on top. And now I just need to do the ones that are run underneath here, which is a very small amount. I mean, we have like 4 or 5 sensors in here. To finish this up, I'm gonna go ahead and take the entire intake off the motor. That way I can get to the loom that's underneath here. We're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna put the slip loom over the ends, and then we're gonna put the split loom down the backbone of it. Then we're gonna go ahead and join these ones back in here, run everything over, and then we'll go ahead and start terminating them. And I'll probably bring you guys back once we're done terminating them and the thing's just about finished. So it moves along pretty quickly. It just depends on how quick you want to move and how much work you really want to do on it. All right, just want to give you guys one quick glimpse of this before we throw the intake back on it. But that is going to be the entire front end of this harness. Part that runs under the intake. You can see how small we actually got. That's pretty good. I love the sound of that. Nice. So anyways, we got IAC, throttle position, alternator, mass airflow sensor, and coolant temp sensor. So everything actually needs to run to the front of the vehicle right there. Oh yeah. And in that one, we also added the knock sensor. So everything else is actually still connected on the intake side of it. So we got the map sensor back there, crank position sensor, cam sensor, injectors, and coils. So only other thing we actually have to add to this harness would be the O2 sensors. That I'm just gonna loom them separately, and then they're just gonna join into the main leg. So not a big deal on that to do. But like you see, we do have to extend these two for the alternator. However, and I forgot about this on the last one I did, and we also have to extend the, let's see, is that the, we also have to extend the IAC. Yep. So the IAC wires are going to be too short, and I forgot about that. I ran into the same issue doing the wire harness for the El Camino, and we ended up having to extend those 4 wires. So I completely blanked on that, but I think these ones are actually going to be long enough because these are for the throttle position sensor. If not, that's just 3 wires for that to extend. So yeah, we have to go ahead and grab the soldering iron and get a little more work done. But moving along, almost done, guys. So I think we really got ourselves to a good spot on this build. So if you check it out, it looks really complete. It looks really good. So this is our main harness now. There's our injectors, coils, both sides. Got our idle air control, our throttle position sensor. We have mass airflow sensor, alternator, and coolant temp sensor. We just don't have the map or the alternator on it right now, so I'm not gonna worry about those. And guess what? We can still start it without those. It can run basic settings. You can actually run it with a lot of things unplugged, but not gonna make a big difference. So, do need crank position sensor down there, right there. Do need cam position sensor. You need both of those for timing. It will not run without them. It won't even prime the fuel pump while cranking if you don't have the crank position sensor. That's one of the things that makes the fuel pump prime. Map sensor, need it. It will run like garbage if you don't have that. Knock sensors, don't need it to run, but you know, you still want them on there. And then very, very, very important, grounds. We have one on each head. So grounds. Nobody will ever tell you you have too many grounds. It's the more the merrier. So backbone's all done, terminated all the way to the ECU. Haha. So need to clean this up a little bit, but we still have the covers to put back on. And then we have all of our positive wires. So we have a group of wires coming out of here, and this is the ones that are going to be interfacing with the chassis. So these are the ones that we're going to run off the backbone, interface with the chassis. Pink and red and orange represent positive power. So right now we have them all grouped together because normally we're going to run these through a fuse box, through a couple of relays as well. But for the purpose of starting it on the engine stand, one of the reasons we call it a 3-wire start, or a 3-wire setup, or a 3-wire whatever, or a 3-wire conversion, is because we need physically 3 connected wires to start the whole engine. And then that is this group of wires here. Once this is on, this represents key on in the on position. So this is giving power to the ECU, the mass airflow sensor, the coils, the injectors, the O2 sensors, anything that need positive power. These two that are for the ECU power here actually will turn on the ECU. Once they get power, you will actually hear like the stepper motor for the IAC controller start to click and move around because it has to home real quick. You will also hear the fuel pump prime for several seconds. That's because you're giving power to the ECU and it's turning on for the first time. So other than that, we also have these 2 orange, well, 1 orange wire, but 2 orange wires. These are actually for the ECU as well. These are memory for the ECU. Think of it when you do a stereo. Orange is always constant 12 volts. It means it's for usually memory. So this one will always get 12 volts all the time, no matter what, even when the car is off. These are pink and red, only red because I had to extend the wires out and I didn't want 8 wires for the injectors, so I have 1 for each bank. So pink wires, just pretend these are pink. Pink wires are switched 12 volt source. That means when you turn the key to the on position, then they get 12 volts. So this is our whole bunch of them. Everything that's pink and orange and red will get 12 volts when the car has to be, or when the engine has to be started. So other than that, we also have this group of wires here that come out. These are all going to the chassis for various things. And we got, yep, there's fan number 1 and fan number 2. These are my biggest fans. So these are actually one, if you remember when we went over the harness video and we were looking at LT1 swap, we saw that there was 1 wire that was going to be repurposed, and then we were going to have to add a wire. So what happens is these are going to give a negative output to trigger a relay to turn on a fan. So you will have to wire a relay in for these that will reverse the polarity from the negative output signal to the 12 volts. And that way you can also run it directly off the battery. You never want to run something like heavy right off of the ECU because it can't, usually they only have on the positive 5 volt reference and it keeps the heat down inside the ECU. So anytime you need something that needs 12 volts or considerable amps to run, you always want to run it through a relay. So those are fans. I'll leave this, yep, fuel pump. Fuel pump, I hear some people have some issues with this sometimes. This is not to run your fuel pump. This is to turn the relay on to run your fuel pump. You run this through a relay and then you run that to your fuel pump. Always, always. It is 5 volts. If you try running your fuel pump off this, you'll get like about half the actual pressure to the rail and it'll run like crap. It might even start, and actually it will start. Ask me how I know, but it will run like crap. So this one here is one we don't really care about. Check engine light. Psh. This one actually gives a ground signal to the check engine light to come on. So when you turn the key to the on position, the check engine light will get a 12 volt signal to it, a positive signal to it, and will only come on and illuminate when the ECU sends a negative signal to it. That'll complete the circuit. And then the last one here is the white wire, which is tach. So this one gives the resistance output for your tach to run. So actually we have one more than that, but it's not in this bundle here. It's actually in this bundle here. And that is your OBD2 serial cable. However, we're actually running 3 wires through that. So if you see, we got, hard to see, 3 wires in there. And that's only because we're piggybacking off the ground inside here, as well as the 12 volt positive off that lead there. And that's just so we don't have to run it inside the vehicle and we don't have to have it connected to a vehicle, because we want to be able to tune the ECU while it's on the engine stand and actually also do data logs while it's on the engine stand. So you see we actually got plugged into my HP tuner dongle here. And then that will actually just mount inside the vehicle whatever is easiest for you to mount it. So that is the gist of this entire setup here. So that is all we need. So when we go back to the 3-wire that I was explaining earlier, 3-wire is your positive turn-ons. So this gives power to everything that needs to run. Coils are very important because that's actually the one you're going to disconnect to shut the engine off. So this will get connected to positive power. And then we don't have it on here right now, but the starter will be here in a couple days. And once we hook the starter up, that one will also go to the positive power. We also have a relay wire to run to it. So what's going to happen is we will connect the positive lug on the starter and then connect that to the positive wires there. That will be our one positive wire. Our second wire is our ground. We can chassis ground that anywhere on this motor, and actually I can do it right to the engine stand because it's connected to it. So we'll just connect, we've got a couple jumbo cables over here, for instance, running off the BMW's battery. And what we'll do is the positive will actually go to this one here and the main lug on the starter. Negative will go anywhere onto the actual metal, probably just do it to one of these studs here. And then our third wire is actually right here. And this is our starter relay trigger wire. And this one will hook up to the relay of the starter, and through the process of a push button that I'll actually have hooked up to this red wire as well, we'll be able to give it momentary positive to crank the motor. And as soon as it fires up, we let off of it. So that's the 3-wire setup. That's all we need, 3 wires. Power here, power to ground, and power to starters to turn it on. There's your 3-wire. So we're to a really good spot now where we can finish up the wiring. We're gonna call this wiring completed because, like I said, it still needs a fuse box. It still needs some relays, but in order to start this, we don't, because we can actually, while we do need a relay to turn on the fuel pump, we're actually gonna be using an external fuel pump. And to start the engine, I'm just gonna manually connect it to the battery. So I guess it's a 4-wire, well, whatever. All right, so real quick, I was gonna end it off, but I just wanna go ahead and show the power. Let's give the power to the PCM here and see if we can blow something up. Yep. All right, let's see if it holds on there. You can hold on, touch the engine stand, and then short out. All right, so that should have power now. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and pull this up here, and we're gonna start seeing if we can pull data in from the PCM to show you that it has full power. Look at that, we see it. Now, see if we can take a look at the throttle position. Look at that. Wah, wah, wah. Actually, yep, we got power, it's reading. Look at that. Real simple, guys. Didn't take a whole lot of work. About a day's worth of work. You just gotta put the work into it. But it's reading, it's on. We can actually start off this now. So I think that's a good spot to leave it off. And on the next video, we are gonna go ahead and work on the fuel system and get that plumbed up, which is really, really simple. It's probably the jankiest way to do it, but it'll work. We're actually just gonna run it off a gas can. So I think Vice Grip Garage would approve, but we're gonna go ahead and we got a inline fuel pump on the way in, and we're just gonna go ahead and run a return setup into a gas can. And we're gonna make sure that we put the gas can right below the exhaust, so if it shoots a fireball, we all die. But we're gonna go ahead and get that set up, and then we're gonna fire this thing up. So the only other thing I have to work on is, so this is a stock ECM here, and it still has VATS enabled on it, so we're gonna have to disable that so we can start it. I can either register that to my HP Tuners dongle, or I actually want to try it. I've had it sitting around for a while, and I really kind of wanted to give it a shot and see if it works. I have LSx Droid, so I do want to play around with that, and I actually want to see if I can disable VATS with that one. I've seen the interface. It doesn't look easy, but it's going to be a lot cheaper to just unlock VATS and disable check engine codes and stuff. So maybe we'll give that a shot. But next video, we're starting this up. We're really close, guys. I just need a few things, only a couple small things. I'm waiting on the starter, the fuel pump. I need to get an oil filter on here and fill this thing with oil, and golly, that's about it. So thanks for watching. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, get those notifications. Thanks for watching.